Hey, this is Miko, and I wanted to explain to you some of the most basic components of what's called DeFi. So, DeFi is decentralized finance, and the basic primitives of decentralized finance are what's called smart contracts. So, what exactly is a smart contract? So, I'm going to borrow from the ideas of Nick Szabo, who really is core in understanding smart contracts. And the way he explains a smart contract is he explains it essentially as a vending machine. So a vending machine is so simple, which is you put value in the form of coins, right? And then value comes out in the form of like a Coke or like whatever, snacks, chips. So this is a vending machine, right? So this is really one of the atomic primitives of DeFi, right? Which is essentially this idea of vending, right? So if you think about vending, the idea of vending is essentially really isomorphic to, it's the same thing as something like a DEX or decentralized exchange, in the sense that what you do is you put in something like A, right? And you get out something like B, right? So for example, you could put in Ether and then you can get out some kind of a token, like let's say you get like DAI or, from Maker or something like that, right? So this is really just the concept of exchange. So that is vending, right? So vending is one of the absolute key primitives in this concept of DeFi. So the second thing that I want you to understand is that there's actually a subset or variation on the concept of vending machine. And this is what I call the lending machine. So a lending machine is actually a variation of a vending machine. But the way that a lending machine works is that you basically put your value into the machine and it actually locks the value you put in. And the locking is really collateralization of a loan. So what happens is that you put let's say you put 10 Ether into the lending machine, right? So now it's collateralized. And now what you can do is you can borrow Ether, and that you can actually start to kind of use that. So let's say you have like 60%, right? So let's say you put in 10 Ether, you can actually get 6 Ether out, and now you can use that Ether. So, why would you do that? So it's pretty simple, which is it's really about creating a larger holding position, right? So the larger holding position means that like the 10 Ether that you have that you're holding was really what you started with. But now that you have 6 Ether that you can use to exchange or trade, you can kind of basically buy and sell on the free market using the 6 Ether. But the point is that you still own the 10 Ether. It just happens to be locked inside of the lending machine. So the thing that's exciting about this kind of lending machine is that it allows someone with 10 Ether to now have the equivalent exposure in Ether to 16 Ether. And this is really about the generation of leverage through the borrowing from the lending machine. So I just want to say that there are vending machines and there are lending machines, right? And that these mechanisms are two of the fundamental atomic primitives inside of DeFi or decentralized finance. So there's a third primitive, and I'm having a little bit of trouble naming it because I really want it to rhyme with the other ones. And I think what I'm thinking of it's more like what I would call a friending machine. It's kind of perhaps a weak name. But what I'm really describing is this, right? Which is that we're starting to see hybrid machines that appear. And what's happening is that some of these machines actually dispense loyalty, right, in the form of like a reward token, right? So that becomes kind of almost a befriending, right? So basically what happens is, so for example, if you look at Compound, there's a couple of really, really novel mechanics, right? So the first mechanic is that you have Compound is essentially a vending machine, but it's also a lending machine. So the thing that's very interesting is, let's say you have 10 Ether. What happens in the case of Compound is you put it into the lending machine, and what you can do now is you can withdraw a loan of maybe, let's say, 6 Ether. So you're in the same position as you were before. But the thing that's kind of exciting about this is that in addition to that, you actually get 10 of what's called C Ether. And C Ether is actually a freely exchangeable and tradable form of what you have locked up as collateral. So now you actually have a tradable thing, and that becomes a vending machine that is also a lending machine. And the mechanism that I think is really interesting is if you kind of borrow and you loan or lend within the compound framework, there actually is a reward that comes in the form of comp, which is the compound token. And that reward is effectively almost like I would call it a befriending machine, which is that, it's trying to create loyalty. So it's using this additional token as a loyalty incentive. So really what you're talking about are these very atomic primitives. So you're talking about vending machines and you're talking about lending machines, right? And then I'm actually adding another mechanic, which is sort of befriending, right? And if you look at all three of those things, they're all just variations on a vending machine, right? Because all a lending machine is it's a vending machine that actually holds on to your money and allows you, once you put the money in, to have interactions with the machine, and eventually you can get your money back by hitting the coin return button, but only if you've kind of executed all of your obligations with that machine, right? In other words, if you paid off the loans, then you can ask for your collateral back and it'll return those to you, right? So the thing that I think is important to understand is that they're all vending machines, but you should think about each of these functions as being kind of a subset of vending, right? Which is lending is kind of this time-lapse form of vending, right? And then you can also see this kind of befriending as really being kind of, I would say, a null case of a vending machine, which is sort of a befriending machine is kind of like you get free tokens without actually having done much of anything except maybe interact with the machine. So it's sort of a bonus, right? So in a way, it's kind of like a funny vending machine where if you put a certain amount of money in, you get 2 snacks instead of 1, so you're getting these bonuses, right? So that's another, but that's really just a variation of vending. It's just a slightly different kind of vending. So what I wanted to say is that, these 3 primitives that I've identified, which is sort of vending, lending, and befriending, like they're really all just a subset of like vending, and there's variations on vending. But really what I wanted to clarify is that these fundamental primitive mechanics are used to build much more complex financial derivatives and much more complex financial exposure products that enable people to sort of build. And that's why these kind of vending machines get snapped together like Legos to form much more complex things, involving, and there's many, many variations, like things like flash loans, and so there's a lot of different twists to kind of how this thing plays out. But at the end of the day, those are the kind of core primitives that you need to understand in order to wrap your head around this emerging thing that's called DeFi. So that's kind of my quick explanation. Hope it's useful. Love to see any comments that you might have. If you have any questions or any kind of objections to the way I'm framing it, please go ahead and put them in the comments. I'm excited to get feedback about this idea. So hope it makes sense. Thanks very much.